Hello.
I don't know, I've called this practical security. That's not really quite what I'm thinking. We've had more and more conversations around InfoSec and encryption over the last, I guess, the last 4 weeks really. And there's still lots of conversation that's going on around it. And there's still lots and lots of questions to be answered. And so when I say practical, we're perhaps not quite there and right, this is what you do. But I kind of wanted to cover why security is important to us and try and pin down some of the terms we keep using and what they mean and why they may be good enough or not good enough for us. So I just wanted to cover that a little bit. So do we want that to happen? Sorry, was there a copyright on your image? So this really could happen. Pete and Andrew and the people that are responsible for the business could end up in prison because of our actions. So as much as I'm sure we really don't want this to happen, it could. We really do need to take the security of the data that we look after seriously. Because not only could that happen, but that might happen as well, and we would have no jobs. We've heard about, or Equifax were a brilliant example, and the story about their breach turned up at exactly the moment we were trying to convince people of the seriousness of data security here. The fact is that Equifax are still there and they will continue to go. A data breach for Equifax is a really serious thing for them, but they are big enough and powerful enough that they will continue to go. If we have a breach today, we really probably won't be here tomorrow because we've got one customer and our security is the single most important thing we can offer to our customers. Pete mentioned this earlier, if you've got a really big bank that's based somewhere else, they're really interested in our products. They care about the things we do, they care about the advice we can offer, but if we can't do it securely, there is no business there for us. So it really does matter. So again, Pete actually started talking about this. Very recently we had an auditor come in and they said, tell us about your InfoSec incidents. What incidents have you had? And we kind of went, none. We've been really good. And they said, no, you're lying. Because every organisation will have InfoSec incidents. And we started to, we realised, right, this is a bad thing. We need to record our InfoSec incidents. And one came up a little while back where we left a Bitbucket repo open to the public. Now, our source code is in there, we don't really want that. So we thought, right, we've got to go through and we've got to write this down as an incident. And we had this horrendous process where we had to fill in a ticket which referred to a Word document. The Word document had to track all the actions. And we kind of said, right, this is not really a way of recording it. So we sat down and we made that a bit simpler. Then a week or so back, we were talking to Tom, who is, I don't know who's met Tom. You all met Tom now? I'm sure most of you. He was standing here yesterday and he will pipe up if you say the wrong thing about security. He tells us the right way to do things, and Tom really does know stuff about security. And we were talking about, well, how do we get InfoSec instilled in the business? It's not one person's responsibility. It's not that person downstairs. It's not my problem. It's everybody's problem. And what we really need to do is try and instill that as culture. And we thought, how can we recognise that the business is doing security seriously? And we spoke for about, I think we had a pretty open conversation for about an hour and a half. And by the end of it, what we actually started to realise was that the number of information security incidents we record is a really, really good measure of how well we consider security in the business. So it kind of became clear that InfoSec incidents are actually a really good thing to have, as long as they're a near miss. So what we want to do is record anything that might have led to a breach, but that we've caught before it does. So for example, in SonarQube we do some security scanning there. We check whether we're coding to OWASP top 10. What we really want to start doing is, if your build fails because of an alert in SonarQube, we actually want to raise an incident off that, because it's really good we found this before it got baked into the code. We want to record it as a near miss and go, yep, that's great, and we actually kind of want to realise, well, how can we improve this behaviour in the future? What we really want to avoid are incidents where we actually lose data. That would be really uncool. So we have two measures in our instance, and I can't, Matt, are you going to show the incident board later, or?
No, I'm not.
All right, I'll go over it just after this. We have two classifications in there. They're all instance. Whenever you recognise something that you think is insecure and could lead to some kind of breach in future, record it and put it down as a near miss. We do, of course, have to do a bit of assessment around whether it really is a near miss. What we really want to avoid is to find out that actually it wasn't near miss, there was a big problem, because that would be uncool. But the point is we've got to motivate. So the more instances we've got, the better. And we actually want to record these as a team metric. The more near misses we have, the better we know we are doing as a team, as a company. And of course we want to catch them as early in the build process, or as early as possible. I don't know if anyone's noticed the door downstairs doesn't shut properly. Strictly speaking, it's an incident. I think we may actually have one in there for it. You know, it's an incident, might happen. Somebody might be able to get into the building and steal data. We want to fix that, but the point is we've recorded it. We've recognised that this is a problem that we've got and we need to do something about it. So that's a really important thing. So please keep your information security hygiene good. Be hygienic. Record these incidents. Be responsible for them. There was another metric we realised as well, which was really around risk assessment. So who's worked in a really big institution that locks down their laptop, says you can't install this, you can only visit that website, and if you move at the wrong time, we can make a note of it. Okay, so the reason they do that is because they've assessed all the things you're allowed to do, and they realise what the consequence of any kind of parameter around that is to their business. If they haven't risk assessed it, you can't use it. We don't want to be the kind of business that says you can't do this, you can't use that software, you can't behave in a particular way. But the only way we can do that is to get you to actually do a risk assessment yourself on, well, what's the consequence of me using this piece of software, of recording data here or in this way. So obviously we don't want to make risk assessment a painful thing. Usually somebody comes to me and says, oh, I've just put this in a Google Doc. I have a quick mental thought of what data have they put in there and what's going to happen if it gets nicked and what's the likelihood of it getting nicked. We all need to be able to do that. And actually to help this, we've built a cool tool called Dora. So Matt and Tom have very carefully put together something that will help you do a really quick, simple risk assessment and get an idea of, is what I'm about to do going to pose a risk to the business? So again, we don't want to end up with a locked building and Pete and Andrew in jail. So Matt is going to cover Dora later, I believe. Just lines that awesome. So it should be a really quick tool, but please, whenever you're doing something new or different, just think, what's the consequence of me doing this? Because it's not up to me or Hassam or Trudy or Andrew to figure it out, it's up to all of us. And that gives us flexibility to use tools we think are right. Okay, so be appropriate, unlike Carmen. Our level of security should be appropriate to the risks. So we don't, Mark said to me this morning, can you please tell me I don't have to encrypt everything? Yes, you don't have to encrypt everything, but you do have to store your data securely in an appropriate way. As I said, a lot of these conversations are still going on, so we don't know yet what data we need to store at what levels, and this is something that Graham and I have been working on. So there is work in progress to work out, well, what data needs to be stored how. We know that PII data, personally identifiable information, does need to be stored securely. And Tom's point is always, it's got to be defensible, and it's got to be to really the best technical level you can currently. Encryption's a pretty common thing these days. So really, we must encrypt data. What data that is and the volumes of it you're storing determines, how we do that. A few years ago, if you encrypted your disks, you were really good security-wise. If you encrypted disks, that was it. You'd met the auditor's criteria. Now it's bare minimum for us to encrypt our disks. So encrypt at rest basically means that the hardware it's stored on has some encryption on it. If the hardware gets nicked, a cracker can't just turn it on and get the data in. But once it's turned on and the password's been put in, everything is in clear text. So encryption at rest is, again, the bare minimum we need to do. What we've come to recognise is that for sensitive data, we really need to encrypt it in the app. It's got to be above the level of the operating system, because Again, all those levels of encryption are basically, once the system's up and running, once a hacker is actually able to get to it, it's in clear text again. So we've got to encrypt at a higher level. So I was kind of thinking, well, what are the analogies to these levels of encryption? So we've got some picture of what's appropriate here. So I kind of see that no encryption is like leaving your front door open. I would also publishing your address. I'm going on holiday for 2 weeks and I live here and I've not locked the front door. So anyone can get in. Disk encryption is kind of like putting a lock on the door, but then you just give lots of people anyway. So again, once the machine's turned on, that encryption doesn't do anything. Turning the machine on unlocks the encryption. Lots of people have asked, why don't we use database encryption? Database encryption is usually a commercial offering, so Oracle will sell it, Microsoft will, Mongo will sell it. But again, as soon as your database is actually on and answering requests, it's decrypted. So you've paid an awful lot for not a lot really. It will encrypt the backup once you put it out. So database encryption is not really good enough for us. It's not a good enough level of encryption. What we want to be doing as our basic level really is application encryption. So we've referred to it quite a lot as row level encryption, but to be honest, row level is a little bit different. We need to put an encryption key into our application so that the data that is stored is in encrypted format. So if somebody goes and opens up SQL browser or Mongo editor, they can't read that data, they can't use it. So we want to be encrypting the data in the database. And the best place for us to do that is with application level encryption. The problem is that you're using the same locking key for all of your things. So once you've got that key, then you still have access to all the data. So where do we want to aim? Well, if you think about a prison, there's not just a lock on the outside door, there's a lock at every stage. Every prisoner's in a different room with a different key to each door. We want to be at this kind of point. I know it's not something we're going to do tomorrow, but this is kind of where we need to be working towards. Each piece of data has its own key. That's stored behind another level of security. There's a different key for that. We want to be changing the keys every few months. If the key is found, then in 3 months' time we can stop worrying about the risk of that. This is a really high bar, but this is where we need to be aiming as a company. We want to be saying we have those highest levels of security so that when Minerva and Saturn turn up, they don't start picking apart what we're doing. We can say, this is how we operate, and they go, awesome, let's just get on and do business. So this is kind of, again, I can't tell you today how we do it, but this is where we need to be going. These are kind of the reasons why. So, any questions? Thank you.